Have you ever noticed that some people can make a decision in just a few seconds, while others spend hours or even days imagining all the possibilities before acting? They write a message, delete it, rewrite it, read it again, change a word, move a comma, imagine how the other person will interpret it, close their phone, and a few minutes later open the conversation again to check if they really said the right thing. Maybe you'll do that. Perhaps you've relived an entire conversation while taking a shower. Perhaps he suddenly remembered something he said years ago and felt ashamed as if it had happened today. Perhaps you lie in bed completely exhausted, close your eyes, and at that very moment your mind decides to begin a marathon of thoughts. She revisits the past, questions the present, and it tries to control a future that hasn't even arrived yet. While the rest of the world seems to simply move on, you remain trapped in imaginary dialogues, endless possibilities, and questions that never find a definitive answer. And the hardest thing to explain is that this doesn't happen because you want it to. In fact, you would often give anything for a few minutes of silence inside your own head. If all of this sounds familiar, perhaps this video is one of the most important explanations you'll ever hear about yourself. Because there's a good chance you've spent years believing a lie. The lie that overthinking means there's something wrong with you. Before we continue, if you enjoy understanding how the human mind works and want to learn more about psychology in a simple, clear, and non-judgmental way, subscribe to the channel. Every week we publish videos that help thousands of people better understand themselves and those around them. Now imagine the following situation. You send a simple message to someone. A few minutes later, he realizes that the person has seen the message, but hasn't replied. For many people, this means only one thing. She is busy. But for those who overthink, this brief silence can turn into an entire story. Did I say something wrong? Has she lost interest? Did I misinterpret everything? Should I send another message? In just a few minutes, your mind constructs dozens of explanations, almost all negative. And interestingly, almost all of them treat you as the problem. Now consider another situation. You meet someone new. The conversation seems pleasant. You laugh. Everything seems natural. But when she gets home, her mind decides to relive every second of that encounter. You begin to analyze the tone of your voice, the pauses, the jokes, the stares, the words you chose, the words he left unsaid. Meanwhile, the other person is probably already thinking about dinner, work, or what they're going to watch before bed. But you're still there, reliving a conversation that ended hours ago. This happens because, for those who overthink, events rarely end when they end. They continue to exist within the mind. And that's exactly what makes this pattern so tiresome. People often assume that tiredness comes only from physical exertion. But there is another type of exhaustion. The one that nobody sees. That caused by a mind that never switches off. Imagine carrying a backpack all day long. After a few hours, your shoulders start to ache. Now imagine carrying hundreds of thoughts at the same time. Thoughts about the past, regarding the future, regarding decisions, about people, regarding possibilities, regarding mistakes that may never have happened. The weight doesn't show on the outside, but it exists. And often, it is precisely this invisible weight that causes some people to end the day completely exhausted. Perhaps you've even heard phrases like, "You complicate everything. You overthink. Relax. Just stop thinking." Those who say this usually believe that thinking is a choice, as if it were possible to press a button and turn off the mind. But for those who have lived this pattern for years, that's not how it works. Thoughts arise almost automatically. And the more a person tries to expel them, the more they seem to return. It's like trying not to think about an elephant. The very moment someone asks you not to think about them, that's precisely who your mind focuses on. Something similar happens with thoughts. The more you fight against them, the more attention you end up giving them. And perhaps that's precisely why so many people spend years trying to solve the problem the wrong way. They believe they need to eliminate all thoughts, when, in fact, psychology suggests something different. The problem may not be the quantity of thoughts, but in the way you learn to respond to them. This difference seems small, but it completely changes the way we understand the mind. Think about it for a moment. Do you believe every thought that pops into your head? Probably not. Have you ever imagined absurd situations? You have already misinterpreted something. Have you ever thought someone was annoyed with you, only to find out they were just tired? Our minds are constantly producing thoughts, but not all of them represent reality. Still, those who overthink tend to treat each thought as if it were an important clue, as if ignoring it were dangerous, as if leaving a question unanswered were a risk. And that's precisely where this cycle begins to strengthen. Without realizing it, you begin to believe that you need to analyze everything. Every detail. Every word. every glance, every decision. As if, by thinking a little more, he finally found the perfect answer. But there's a problem. Life almost never offers perfect answers. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. Because there is a psychological mechanism that causes intelligent, careful, and sensitive people to fall into this trap without even realizing it. And when you understand how this mechanism works, a lot about your own mind finally starts to make sense. There is a very common idea about people who overthink. The idea is that these people are simply indecisive. But that explanation is far from telling the whole story. In fact, many people who spend hours reflecting on a decision know exactly what they would like to do. The problem is not the lack of response. The problem is the need to be absolutely certain that that answer will never have bad consequences. And that's a huge difference. Imagine two people facing the same choice. They are both afraid. They both have doubts. But one of them accepts that she will never have all the necessary information before deciding. The other believes that if she thinks for a few more minutes, or perhaps a few more hours, she will finally find the perfect answer. But that answer almost never exists. And that's precisely where one of the most silent traps of the human mind begins. Psychology calls this an excessive search for certainty. Our brains like predictability. He likes to know what's going to happen. Because, for thousands of years, anticipating dangers increased our chances of survival. If our ancestors had ignored any sign of threat, they might not have lived long enough to learn from their mistake. That's why our brains evolved to pay close attention to what could go wrong. This mechanism was extremely useful when the danger was a wild animal hidden in the forest. But today it continues to function, even when the biggest threat is an unanswered message or a presentation at work. The brain does not perfectly differentiate between a physical danger and a social danger. For him, the possibility of being rejected, criticized, or humiliated also deserves attention. And the more important that situation seems, the greater the effort the mind tends to have to try to control it. That's why some people can spend hours imagining what a conversation that hasn't even happened yet will be like. They rehearse their answers. They create complete dialogues. They think of all possible questions. Then they imagine all the possible reactions. And when the moment for conversation finally arrives, nothing happens as had been imagined. Because reality rarely follows the script created by our minds. Perhaps this has already happened to you. You spent days worrying about an important meeting. You thought about everything that could go wrong. You slept badly. She felt anxious. He arrived at the scene expecting the worst. And in the end, the meeting ended in a few minutes. No problem. No conflicts. Without the disaster that his mind had foreseen. Interestingly, this doesn't usually bring relief for very long. Because another concern soon arises. Another scenario. Another possibility. Another what if. This is an important detail. Overthinking doesn't solve the need for control. Most of the time, it just feeds that need. The more you think, the more your brain believes that thinking is necessary. It's like someone checking the front door several times before going to sleep. The first time it makes sense. Maybe on Monday as well. But when this verification is repeated 10 times, it no longer serves to increase security. It only serves to temporarily reduce anxiety. And, without realizing it, the brain learns an association. When I'm anxious, I need to double-check. Something similar happens with excessive thinking. You think. The anxiety subsides for a few moments. Then a new question arises. You think about it again. Anxiety decreases again. And the cycle continues. The problem is that the brain interprets this momentary relief as proof that thinking worked. Then he repeats the behavior more and more. Until thinking ceases to be a tool. And it becomes a habit. Perhaps that's why so many people describe the feeling as living inside their own head. While the world continues to unfold outside, a huge portion of that energy is occupied trying to organize thoughts that never end. There's an interesting saying in psychology that states that what we pay attention to tends to grow in our perception. Think about when you buy a car of a certain color. Suddenly, it seems like that model started appearing everywhere. In fact, he's always been there. Your brain just started noticing more. Something similar happens with thoughts. If your mind is constantly searching for signs of error, rejection, or failure, it will find evidence that seems to confirm those fears. Not because the world has changed, but that's because his focus changed. It's like using a flashlight in a dark room. You only illuminate a small part of the room. And he begins to believe that this is all there is. Those who overthink tend to highlight precisely the negative possibilities, the risks, the mistakes, the criticisms. You lose. Meanwhile, dozens of positive possibilities remain out of focus. Not because they are any less real. But why aren't they receiving the same attention? This mechanism also explains why so many people interpret small events as major signs. A colleague responds more briefly. A friend takes a long time to reply to a message. Someone makes a neutral expression during a conversation. For many people, these details go unnoticed. But for those trapped by excessive thoughts, these can turn into hours of analysis. Is he angry with me? Did I do something wrong? Did I say too much? The curious thing is that these questions rarely find a definitive answer. And that's precisely why they continue to occupy space in our minds. There is another aspect that is rarely discussed. People who overthink often believe they are being extremely rational. But often the exact opposite happens. It is emotion that is driving thought. The fear of rejection. The fear of disappointing someone. The fear of making mistakes. The fear of missing opportunities. The fear of making a decision that one might regret. These emotions function like lenses. They change the way we see reality. When we are afraid, we tend to perceive more dangers. When we feel insecure, we tend to notice more signs of rejection. When we are anxious, we tend to imagine more negative scenarios. And it happens so automatically that it seems like absolute truth. But that's not always the case. In fact, many times our mind is just trying to protect us. But she does this using a strategy that comes at a very high price. And that price is almost never visible to someone looking from the outside. Because no one sees the effort required to carry a mind that never stops. No one sees how many simple decisions turn into major internal battles. No one sees how many hours are spent trying to predict a future that doesn't even exist yet. But you can feel it. Every day. And perhaps, for the first time, you are beginning to realize that this pattern did not arise because you are weak. It emerged because his brain learned that thinking more was a way to stay safe. The question is this strategy still really protecting you? Or has she started preventing you from living? That's the question we're going to explore next. Because there is an invisible cost to overthinking. And most people only realize this cost after years of living within that cycle. There comes a point when thinking ceases to be an attempt to find answers. And it becomes an attempt to avoid any possibility of suffering. This is a detail that few people notice. Those who overthink are rarely looking for the perfect choice. Most of the time he is trying to avoid making the wrong choice. It looks the same. But it isn't. When your goal is to find the best decision, there comes a point when you accept that you already have enough information to move forward. But when your goal is to completely eliminate the chance of error, that moment never comes. Because there's always another possibility to explore. Another scenario to imagine. One more detail to review. And, without realizing it, their life begins to come to a standstill. Perhaps this explains why so many people spend months postponing important decisions. They are not waiting for more courage. They are waiting to feel a certainty that will probably never exist. And until that certainty appears, the days go by. Opportunities pass by. People change. Life goes on. There's a well-known saying that time heals many wounds. But there is another truth that almost no one talks about. Sometimes, overthinking steals precisely the time that can never be recovered. Think about how many opportunities can be missed simply because your mind is still analyzing. How many messages were never sent? How many conversations never happened? How many projects never even started? How many dreams remained only in the imagination? Not due to a lack of ability. But that's because the brain kept seeking reassurance that everything would turn out all right. But life has never offered that kind of guarantee to anyone. Not even for you. Not for anyone else either. There is something even more silent happening. When you spend too much time analyzing possibilities, your brain starts to confuse thinking with action. You feel like you're doing something. But in practice, it remains exactly in the same place. Imagine someone standing by the side of a road. Instead of walking, this person decides to study all the maps possible. Analyze each curve. Every detour. Every risk. Every possibility. Hours later, it's still standing there. Meanwhile, another person with far less information began to walk. He made a few mistakes. It changed direction. He learned along the way. And it ended up going much further. This is perhaps one of the biggest differences between knowledge and experience. There are answers that only appear as we walk. Never before. And perhaps that's exactly what makes overthinking so tiring. Because your mind tries to find answers to questions that could only be answered by living. There is another very interesting aspect. Those who overthink often imagine they are protected. But often the opposite happens. The more negative scenarios you create, the more your brain believes the world is a dangerous place. It's like watching the same horror movie every day. Even knowing it's fiction, her body begins to react. His heart races. His muscles become tense. His breathing changes. Now imagine doing that with your own thoughts. Every day. For years. Your body starts to respond as if those scenarios were really happening. Even when everything is perfectly fine. That's why some people experience a tiredness that's hard to explain. They didn't run. They carried no weight. They didn't spend the whole day working. But by the end of the afternoon they are completely drained. Because there is invisible work happening all the time. The brain is simulating futures. Calculating risks. Repeating conversations. Trying to predict reactions. Seeking solutions to problems that may never exist. All of this requires energy. Lots of energy. Perhaps that's why some people describe a curious sensation. They say the mind never rests. Even during moments when they should be relaxing. While watching a movie. While they walk. While they eat dinner. While they try to sleep. There's always a second conversation happening. The conversation inside one's own head. And this conversation is almost never silent. She asks. She criticizes. She compares. She revises. She imagines it. She warns. She insists. Until you start to believe that this noise is part of your personality. But maybe I won't. Perhaps it's just a habit your mind has repeated so many times that it's come to feel like part of who you are. There is a huge difference between identity and behavior. You are not your thoughts. You are the person who observes these thoughts. It may seem like a simple idea, but it completely changes the way we see our own minds. Imagine the sky on a very cloudy day. If you only look at the clouds, you might believe that the sky has disappeared. But he's still there. The clouds just pass in front of him. Something similar happens with thoughts. Thoughts appear. They change. They disappear. Others are arriving. But there's something in you that keeps observing all of this. And perhaps you've never stopped to notice that difference. Because he spent so many years believing every thought that came to him, he failed to notice who was observing them all. This is one of the reasons why many modern psychological approaches encourage people to develop a different relationship with their own thoughts. Instead of fighting against them. Instead of believing them all. Instead of trying to eliminate them. Learn to observe them. Like someone watching clouds crossing the sky. Some are lightweight. Others seem enormous. Some disappear quickly. Others take a little longer. But none last forever. This may seem hard to believe now. Especially if you've spent years living with a racing mind. But there is something extremely important. Thoughts are not orders. Thoughts are not predictions. Thoughts are not facts. Often these are simply attempts by the brain to prepare you for future situations. But the brain doesn't know exactly which of these situations will actually happen. That's why he creates so many. And that's precisely where the illusion arises that we need to answer all of them. But do we really need to? Or have we simply learned to believe it? This question may seem like a small one. But perhaps this is one of the most liberating questions in this entire video. Because when you start to realize that not every question needs an immediate answer, his mind slowly begins to breathe again. Perhaps, at this moment, you are thinking about something that you have never had the courage to say out loud. Why is my mind like this? This question has been on many people's minds for years. And when they can't find an answer, they end up creating their own explanation. I am weak. I'm complicated. I ruin everything. I was born this way. But psychology often looks at this situation in a different way. Instead of asking, what's wrong with this person? She asks, what has this mind learned to start functioning this way? This small change in perspective completely transforms the conversation. Because often what seems like a problem today began as an attempt at protection. Imagine a child growing up hearing criticism for every little mistake. She learns quickly that making mistakes is dangerous. Then start paying more attention. Review what you're doing. Think before you act. Analyze the consequences. At first, this seems like a good strategy. She avoids some criticism. You receive some praise. Your brain registers this experience. They like me more when I don't make mistakes. Without realizing it, that strategy becomes part of how she faces the world. The years go by. The child grows up. But the brain continues to function according to the same logic. But now the scenario has changed. The problem is that the brain doesn't always perceive this change. He continues trying to protect her in the same way. Thinking more. Analyzing further. Controlling more. That's not always the case. Each person has their own story. But there is an interesting pattern. Many of the behaviors we develop to survive at a given time remain with us even when they are no longer necessary. It's like carrying an open umbrella around the house. Outside of here it made sense. Inside, it only makes it more difficult for them to move around. Our minds do this all the time. She sticks to old strategies because, at some point, they worked. The difficult part is realizing when they stopped working. Perhaps that's exactly what's happening to you. Your brain believes that thinking more means being more prepared. But in practice, this excessive preparation is robbing him of his peace of mind. There is another detail that deserves attention. Those who overthink often carry an excessive burden of responsibility. It's as if everything depends on one's own choices. As if any small mistake could have enormous consequences. But observe the life around you. How many important things happen without you having any control? People change their minds. Plans have changed. Opportunities arose. Others disappeared. Life has never been completely predictable. It never will be. And perhaps that is one of the greatest challenges for those seeking absolute control. Accepting that some answers simply don't exist. Imagine trying to control the wind. You can observe its direction. You can prepare yourself for it. But you can't decide where it's going to blow. Something similar happens in life. We can make conscious choices. We can act responsibly. But we will never be able to completely control the outcomes. The sooner we accept this, the less energy we waste trying to control what was never in our hands. You may have noticed that a word appears several times throughout this video. Control. Because ultimately, overthinking is rarely about thoughts. It's about control. It's a silent attempt to reduce uncertainty. But there's an irony in all of this. The more we try to control absolutely everything, we feel more anxious. Because we realize time and again that the world remains unpredictable. And then we try to control it even more. This cycle seems endless. Until one day a different question arises. What if I don't need to control everything to live well? This question completely changes the direction of the conversation. Because it opens up space for something that many people have never learned. Trust. Not the confidence that everything will turn out all right. No one can guarantee that. But have the confidence that you will be able to handle whatever happens. There is a huge difference between these two things. People who overthink often believe they need to anticipate all problems before they arise. But emotionally resilient people develop another skill. They learn to trust in their own ability to face unexpected situations. Do you realize how this changes everything? Instead of wasting energy trying to predict thousands of scenarios, you begin to strengthen your ability to respond when they actually happen. This reduces a huge amount of weight. Because you stop carrying around imaginary problems. And it begins to deal only with what truly exists. There is an image that represents this process very well. Imagine someone crossing a bridge. Those who overthink try to calculate the weight of each plank. The wind speed. The strength of the ropes. The possibility of rain. The chance of stumbling. The deterioration of the wood. Meanwhile, another person just starts walking. Not because it's reckless. But because he trusts that he will be able to adjust his steps as the path unfolds. This difference seems small. But it completely changes the experience. The first person crosses the bridge exhausted. The second one arrives on the other side with much less wear and tear. Perhaps life never required you to foresee everything. Perhaps she was just hoping you would keep walking. Even without all the answers. Even with doubts. Even though I'm scared. Because courage has never meant the absence of fear. Courage has always meant moving forward despite it. And perhaps that's exactly what your mind needs to hear today. You don't need to conquer every thought before you start living. You just need to realize that they don't need to decide your every move. Because there is a huge difference between hearing a thought and obey him. This difference may seem small. But it is precisely there that many people begin to reclaim their own freedom. Perhaps there is one question that still lingers in your mind. Will I ever stop thinking so much? The most honest answer is that perhaps the goal isn't to make your mind produce fewer thoughts. Perhaps the real goal is to build a different kind of relationship with them. Imagine someone sitting on the bank of a river. The water keeps flowing. The leaves keep turning. You don't need to go into the river to observe its movement. Something similar happens with thoughts. They appear. They change. Go away. Others are arriving. The more we try to control each of them, the more tear. But when we learn that not every thought deserves attention, something begins to change. You realize that you are not obligated to answer every question that arises. You don't need to win every imaginary argument. You don't need to solve all of tomorrow's problems today. This does not mean living irresponsibly. It means accepting that there is a difference between preparing for life and trying to control what can never be controlled. Perhaps you've spent years believing that overthinking was part of your personality. But what if this is just a habit your mind has learned? Habits can be strengthened. They can also be transformed. And this transformation usually begins when we stop treating each other as enemies. For a long time, you may have criticized yourself for being this way. He called himself complicated, weak, anxious, difficult. But imagine saying those same words to a friend who was suffering exactly as you were. I probably wouldn't say that. You would offer understanding, patience, kindness. So why deny all of this to yourself? Perhaps the most important change is not thinking less. Perhaps it's about stopping believing that you are worth less for thinking differently. Millions of people live with this same pattern. You are not alone. And above all, you're not broken. His mind had simply learned a strategy that attempted to protect him. Now she can learn healthier strategies. This takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. But it starts with understanding, not with blame. If this video helped you understand your own mind a little better, write in the comments, "Now I understand." I want to know how many people felt that this video described experiences they were never able to put into words. And if this content helped you, please leave a like. This simple gesture causes YouTube to recommend this video to other people who may be silently facing the exact same battle. Thank you for staying until the end. Remember, you are not defined by the thoughts that appear in your mind. You are defined by the choices you make, the values you cultivate, and the way you keep moving forward, even when doubt arises. Now I invite you to watch the video that is appearing on the screen. It was chosen specifically to complement everything we've discussed today and can help you understand even more about how the human mind works. See you in the next video.